We reserve the right to deny suspicious transactions. I suggest you come back with your employer. The words cut through the glass showroom louder than any car engine. Heads turn. Someone dropped their coffee lid. Phones were already out, cameras up before she even moved. The woman in the white blouse didn't flinch. She just blinked slowly, as if she'd heard it all before, because she had. 10 minutes earlier, she had walked into Lennox Armored Motors like any other high-end client, calm, focused, composed. But even before she opened her mouth, the room had already decided who she was. Tall glass walls shimmered with sun, casting long beams onto the polished floors. Men in suits admired vehicle specs. Staff in tailored vests buzzed around, but suddenly slowed when she stepped in. The silence wasn't loud. It was tight, controlled, like everyone had hit pause. She wasn't flashy, no designer bag, no noisy jewelry. Just confidence, the kind you earn after years of not being allowed to show it. "Good morning," she had said. "I'm here to purchase the Lennox Vulcan SUV, armored, full spec." The salesman had blinked, smiled like it hurt, and said, "Of course." Just a moment. But that moment stretched into scrutiny, whispered glances, a hushed conversation behind the reception desk. And then, that line. "We reserve the right to deny suspicious transactions. I suggest you come back with your employer." You ever been looked at like a threat just because you looked sure of yourself? She had, more times than she could count. And in that moment, her jaw tightened, not in anger, but decision. Because the SUV wasn't for her, and the reason she needed it was about to leave the whole showroom in stunned silence. If you were in her shoes, would you walk out quietly or stay and make them regret it? Keep watching, because next she says one name that makes the entire room freeze. She didn't leave. That's the part no one expected. The receptionist had already started closing the tab on her screen. The salesman turned to walk away, assuming it was over, done. But the woman in the white blouse took one slow step forward, heels clicking on marble, steady as a metronome. "I said," she repeated, "I'm here to buy that vehicle today." The manager, a tall man in a gray blazer who hadn't looked up from his screen the entire time, finally raised his eyes. "And I said," he replied without blinking, "we reserve the right to refuse service." She didn't argue, didn't yell. Instead, she reached into her bag. People tensed. It wasn't a weapon. It was her tablet, thin, matte black, screen already glowing. She tapped it once, scrolled, tapped again, then held it up for them to see. On the screen, a signed security clearance authorization. Level 5. Federal. Attached to a name that silenced the whole room. Alana Cross, the manager read slowly, founder of Sentinel Systems. A murmur rippled across the room like wind through glass. One customer dropped his phone. A woman near the espresso bar whispered, "Wait, that's Sentinel." She nodded once, and finally said it. "The SUV isn't for me. It's for Judge Ramirez." The air cracked. "Judge the one from the landmark ruling last week?" someone asked, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the name was already everywhere. Just 7 days earlier, Judge Ramirez had handed down a historic decision protecting protest rights and had been receiving anonymous threats ever since. Alana looked straight into the manager's eyes. "I'm protecting someone who protected all of us." That's when the salesman, the same man who had scoffed minutes ago, took a step back. He tried to recover, chuckled nervously. "Mom, we weren't aware of the urgency." But she was already closing her tablet. "Of course you weren't," she said. "You never even asked why." "Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where you held all the power, but were still treated like you had none? What would you have done in her place? Let it go? Or remind them what respect really looks like?" Stick around, because what Alana does next doesn't just shift the energy. It rewrites the rules of the entire showroom. The silence was different now. Not tight, not judgmental, just uneasy. The kind of silence that crawls under your collar when you realize you've made a mistake too big to fix with smiles. Alana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply stepped aside from the desk and turned her gaze toward the SUV. That matte black beast behind the velvet rope. Its surface reflected the overhead lights like armor, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The manager cleared his throat. "Miss Cross, we sincerely apologize. Let's revisit the paperwork and fast-track everything." He gestured to the salesman, who practically tripped over himself trying to pull out the order forms. But she didn't move. She just looked at them, long enough to make everyone shift in place. "Tell me something," she said, voice low. "How many clients do you turn away without asking a single question?" The manager blinked. It's just protocol. We've had incidents. High-value models attract the wrong." She raised a hand. "I'm not the wrong type." "No, of course not," he stammered. "I'm the ignored type." There it was, the truth no one wanted to say out loud. In the corner, one of the customers, the man who had smirked earlier, was now scrolling through news articles on his phone. Alana Cross, cybersecurity empire, global contracts, DOJ consultant. His jaw tightened as the headlines piled up. She took a slow breath, then walked toward the SUV. The rope was still up, but she unhooked it herself, like it didn't exist. She circled the car once, running a finger along its armored frame. The staff watched. No one dared speak. The manager motioned for his staffer to lower the rope again, but she had already stepped past it. Bulletproof glass, run-flat tires, encrypted comms. She muttered to herself, "Decent. Could be better." A beat. Then she turned around, looking directly at the salesman who denied her. "You know," she said, "this entire purchase was meant to happen quietly, off record." He swallowed hard. "But now, you've made me visible. Let me ask you something. If someone tried to erase you with a look, with a policy, with a fake smile, would you disappear quietly or rise loud? Because next, Alana won't just make a decision, she'll make a statement that takes every single person in that room by the throat." Before I tell you what she revealed in front of the entire showroom, I know you might be busy. Maybe you've got errands to run, or maybe your mind can only handle so much quiet fury at once. But if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how it all unfolds. Because Alana Cross was no longer just buying an SUV. She was shifting the weight of the entire room without raising her voice, without breaking a single rule. And that is rare power. The manager, now visibly sweating, tried to pivot. "We can arrange immediate delivery, Miss Cross. Complimentary upgrades. Even an armored driver package." "No." The word dropped like a hammer. "I'm not buying it." A sharp inhale echoed through the room. Even the other clients paused mid-sip. "But Miss Cross, you said." "I came here for the vehicle," she interrupted, calmly. "But I won't accept it now." She stepped closer, her tone still soft, but it carried a weight no invoice could match. "You didn't just refuse to sell me a car," she said. "You refused to ask why I needed it. You refused to see urgency in my voice. You saw threat. You saw suspicion. You didn't see me." A pause. Her eyes scanned the whole team. "And I don't reward blindness." The words didn't come out cruel. They came out surgical, precise. Like she'd been forced to sharpen them over years of swallowing lesser insults. Behind her, a woman watching all of it whispered, "She's not angry. She's surgical." Alana turned, stepped back to the center of the showroom floor, and looked up at the large LED display above the reception desk flashing the Linux brand logo. "I'm placing a blocklist request on all future Sentinel purchases at Linux," she said, effective immediately. And there it was. Not a tantrum, not a threat. A quiet, professional, $1 million withdrawal. The manager opened his mouth, but no words came. She tapped her tablet again. An app opened company procurement portal with 2 swipes. She canceled all 3 pending fleet orders. Behind the front desk, the receptionist gasped audibly. "That's over $1.2 million in lost sales," she whispered, not realizing her mic was still live. Alana didn't blink. She simply said, "Good day," and turned toward the exit. But that wasn't even the worst part. because what she did next, just outside the door, made sure everyone would remember her name for the rest of the year. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. Outside, the valet scrambled to attention. He had seen bits and pieces through the showroom glass, but nothing prepared him for the expression on Alana's face: calm, resolute, untouchable. She didn't wait for her car. Instead, she walked across the marble landing and stood near the edge of the curb, eyes scanning the skyline. That's when a familiar voice called out, "Miss Cross." A man approached, early 40s, dark trench coat, press badge clipped to his collar. One of the embedded journalists who covered corporate defense contracts. He had been there earlier, admiring the SUVs from afar, now jogging toward her with cautious reverence. "Was that what I think it was?" he asked. She gave him a nod, nothing more. "Would you be willing to comment on what just happened in there?" She paused. Then, for the first time since stepping into the building, she smiled just slightly. "Only if you print the full story. No edits, no angles." He raised his phone, already recording. "I just want to say one thing," she said, eyes still fixed on the building behind her. "When you strip someone's identity the moment they walk through a door, don't be surprised when they strip you of your reputation." He blinked. "That's going on record." She looked directly into the camera. "You better hope it does." The video went live within 10 minutes. 10. By the time she slid into the back seat of her black town car, not armored, just efficient, the clip had already reached 30,000 views. By sunset, it would pass 1 million. By morning, Linux armored motors would be trending for all the wrong reasons. Inside the showroom, no one spoke. The sales team stood frozen, watching the footage circulate from phone to phone. The manager stared at the LED screen above the desk, still flashing the Linux logo, now mocked in the video comments as luxury blindness. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone destroy a building without touching a single brick? Because next, Alana's story doesn't end here. It reaches someone powerful, someone watching from even higher up. And what he does with that video changes everything." It was just after midnight when the message lit up his screen. A private link, no subject line, just 6 words. "You should see this, Chairman." Inside a penthouse office 40 floors above the city, Von Remington, global executive of Linux International, leaned back in his leather chair. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled, the kind of man who rarely flinched. But the video, it stopped him cold. He watched in silence as Alana Cross dismantled his dealership with nothing but her presence and precision. Watched the salesman's face twist in condescension. Watched the manager's poor attempt at recovery. Watched her walk out, untouched, unstoppable. No theatrics, no lawsuit threats. Just one name, Judge Ramirez, and one perfectly timed withdrawal. He exhaled, tapped pause, then hit play again. By his second watch, the video had already hit 1.8 million views. By the third, corporate sponsors had begun pulling their ads from Linux showroom content across multiple regions. He didn't slam the desk. He didn't call anyone yet. He just whispered. They didn't recognize her, and that, to Vaughn, was worse than any scandal. Because he did know her, not just her name. He knew her company, her record. She had sat across from him at a defense innovation forum 3 years ago, held her own in a room full of military contractors twice her age. And now, that same woman had just exposed his frontline staff as biased amateurs. In front of the entire industry, he stood slowly, walked to the glass wall of his office, the city pulse below golden, distracted, unaware that someone at the top was deciding what came next. "Let me ask you this. If your name was at risk of being dragged through fire, would you save your company or let it burn?" For what it got wrong, Vaughn made his choice. He turned from the window, picked up his phone, and dialed a direct line. "Activate Protocol 9, he said. "Get me the regional director by morning, and find her, Alana Cross, in person." Because what he was about to offer her no one had ever offered before. Alana didn't answer unknown numbers, especially not at 6:47 a.m. But something about this one no-caller ID, no region made her pause. She sat on the edge of her bed, coffee cooling beside her, thumb hovering. Then she answered, "Miss Cross." The voice was deep, crisp, no hesitation. "My name is Vaughn Remington, chairman of Linux International." She didn't respond. "Not yet. I believe you've seen what your video has done. I won't waste your time with excuses. What happened to you was unacceptable, preventable, and frankly, embarrassing." Still, silence. "I'd like to speak with you, in person. No press, no handlers." She waited one full beat before replying. "Why?" His answer was immediate. "Because this isn't just about one SUV or one showroom. It's about the ecosystem that allowed my team to look at you and see less. I want your help changing that." Alana blinked. That wasn't the response she expected. And yet, something about it felt rehearsed. "I'm not interested in AP or stunt," she said, "or in helping you sweep this under a bigger rug." Vaughn's voice remained level. "Neither am I. I want you on the advisory board for Linux's next-gen civilian defense program. Not for optics, for leadership." Now she laughed, quietly, bitterly. "You think handing me a seat at your table fixes this? No. But I think you at that table might stop it from happening again." A pause. "I read every article about Sentinel systems, your cyber reform protocols. They disrupted an entire network of outdated thinking. I want that same disruption here." For the first time, Alana said nothing out of resistance, but out of genuine surprise. He wasn't offering a gift. He was offering ground. Real ground, where she could build. She stood, walked to the window of her apartment. The sun had barely risen, but the city was waking fast. Emails, headlines, shares, reposts, her name everywhere. "Let me ask you something. If you were offered the power to fix the system that failed you, would you take it? Or would you let it crumble on its own?" Because next Alana gives her answer. And it shakes not just Vaughn, but every single name on his board. The meeting wasn't in some boardroom. It was in an empty aircraft hangar. Vaughn had offered her anything: executive floor, private jet, downtown skyscraper suite, but Alana chose neutral ground, cold, steel, echoing. No distractions. No luxury to mask intent. Vaughn arrived first. Gray suit, no tie. He stood near a lone table in the center, hands folded. Behind him, 3 chairs. One for him. One for the general counsel. One, untouched, for her. When she walked in, no security escorted her. No assistant followed. She moved like the air had cleared just for her feet. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Vaughn motioned to the chair. She remained standing. "You said this isn't a PR stunt," she began. "It's not," he answered. "You said you wanted change." "I do." She looked around the hangar. No banners, no branding. "Then you'll agree to my terms," she said. The general counsel straightened, suddenly alert. Alana took a breath. "First, every single Linux dealership manager goes through equity bias training, led by a team I select independently." Vaughn nodded slowly. "Second, the sales staff at the Midtown location are suspended immediately. Their compensation redirected to organizations protecting civil rights attorneys." No nod this time, just stillness. "Third," she said, voice sharper now, "you don't hire me." A pause. "I beg your pardon," the counsel asked. "You don't hire me," Alana repeated. "You empower me." She stepped closer. "I'm not here to soften your board. I'm here to rewire the thinking behind how power is perceived. I don't want a seat at your table. I want part of the blueprint." Vaughn met her gaze. No deflection, just recalibration. "I'll need full advisory authority over the civilian product division," she added. "And I named a board observers, people who don't look like anyone in this hangar." The silence wasn't resistance anymore. It was awe. She wasn't asking for a role. She was installing a new system. "Let me ask you something. If you've ever been underestimated, have you imagined what it would feel like to not just prove them wrong, but make them change the structure that ignored you?" Because next Vaughn says one word, and that word flips the balance of the entire company. Vaughn didn't flinch. He didn't look to his legal counsel, didn't shuffle the papers on the table, didn't ask for clarification. He just breathed, then said it. Deal. The word wasn't reluctant. It wasn't forced. It was earned. His voice carried across the hangar like a vow, not a concession. The counsel blinked, already reaching for his tablet. We'll need to draft. No, Vaughn interrupted. She just did. He turned to Alana. You've redefined what this partnership is, he said, and we're lucky to have you define it. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her shoulders, a soft drop of armor. Not because she needed validation, because he understood the cost of her terms. They shook hands. No cameras, no signatures, just minds from opposite ends of power now aligned. As Alana turned to leave, Vaughn added one final thing. Why the hangar? She paused at the door. Because this place builds things strong enough to fly, she said. I figured that was the kind of weight this needed. He let out a breath, almost a laugh. And just like that, she was gone. The next morning, the industry woke up to a press release that rippled louder than any scandal. Linux International appoints Alana Cross as Chief Civilian Systems Strategist, with full authority. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone. It wasn't a hire. It was a shift. Inside boardrooms, executives whispered her name like a weather change at her former university. Professors added her story to the ethics curriculum. Protest groups who once dismissed corporate engagement now watched her closely. And at the Midtown showroom, the SUV she once requested stood behind glass, untouched. Velvet rope removed. A placard now sat beside it. This vehicle was not sold. It was a lesson. Let me ask you something. What if every room you were once pushed out of became a room you now rebuilt from the inside? Because next you'll hear the letter Alana wrote not to Linux. Not to Vaughn, but to the girl she used to be. To the girl they almost made invisible. You're going to walk into rooms where no one looks like you. You'll shrink sometimes not because you're small, but because they'll convince you that power has a shape and you're not it. You'll say yes to things that feel like no. You'll get good at folding your brilliance into silence. And people will call that professionalism. They'll tell you, this is how it works. This is just business. Don't take it personal. But you will, and you should. Because one day years from now you'll walk into a room with your own name on the chair, and someone will try to erase you. Like always, only this time. They'll do it in front of a camera. And you won't scream. You won't fight. You'll just stand still and let them expose themselves. And when they do, you won't just correct them. You'll reprogram the rules. They'll call you intimidating, then effective, then necessary. But you'll know the truth. You are always all three. Not because of the title, not because of the paycheck, but because you never stopped being the girl who asked, what if the door isn't locked, just built for the wrong key? Keep walking. They're not ready for you, but you are. She folded the letter once, slid it into a blank envelope, and tucked it into the back of her journal. No one else needed to read it, but if you're hearing this now, maybe you needed to feel it. Let me ask you something. If you could send a message back through time to the version of you that doubted everything, what would it say? Because next the letter doesn't stay hidden forever, and where it shows up will change one more life. It should have stayed in the journal. That's where she meant for it to live private, quiet, hers. But one morning, rushing out for a flight, Alana grabbed the wrong notebook. She didn't notice until hours later, when her assistant texted, "Hey, you meant to leave this on the desk." Attached was a photo. The envelope, untouched, but unsealed. She froze for a second, debated whether to call back, say nothing, lock it away. But before she could decide, another message buzzed in. I read it. I hope that's okay. She blinked, then exhaled. Her assistant, Nia, had joined the company just 8 months earlier, fresh out of school. Quiet but sharp, always asking the right questions except when it came to herself. Now her message continued. I didn't know you wrote like that. I didn't know I was allowed to think like that. Alana read those lines again, slower this time. Then one more came in. Would you mind if I shared it with my sister? Alana smiled, leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes. The letter wasn't hidden anymore. By the end of the week, it had traveled farther than she had forwarded from inbox to inbox, passed quietly in classrooms, printed and folded into notebooks of young women sitting in rooms where they felt invisible. The caption changed, but the signature never did. From A. Professors began reading it aloud during seminars. Startups framed it in their break rooms. One law student got it tattooed, just the line, "Maybe the door isn't locked, just built for the wrong key." Let me ask you something. Has a single sentence ever reached you at the exact moment you needed it most? Because next, someone very unexpected receives the letter, and their response might just bring Alana face to face with the one person she never thought she'd hear from again. He hadn't heard her name in months, not since the incident, not since his transfer. But when the forwarded message hit his inbox subject line, "For your eyes only," his stomach dropped. The first few lines were enough. He remembered the voice, the presence, the way she stood in that showroom, unshakable, while he stood behind the counter thinking he was in control. The letter wasn't angry. That made it worse, because anger he could dismiss, but this was truth written with clarity, with grace, with power. He read it once, then again, slower, as if searching for a version of himself that could have heard it back then. And then he did something he never thought he would. He replied, "Ms. Cross, I don't expect you to respond, and I know I'm the last person you expected to read the letter. But I did. I recognize myself in the worst parts of that showroom, and I want to say, thank you for not destroying me. You could have, but instead you revealed me." He didn't sign it with his full name, just T. Alana never replied, not because she held resentment, but because the letter had already done its job. She didn't need to correct the past. She had rerouted its future. Somewhere across the city, a different showroom now trained its team using footage from the day, not as shame, but as curriculum. Somewhere in a law school, a student cited the Cross incident as the beginning of her dream to regulate civilian safety tech. Somewhere online, a quiet thread grew under the hashtag #RonkyRightLock. Let me leave you with one last question. If your silence could keep you safe, but your voice could free 100 others, which would you choose? Because for Alana Cross, the answer had already echoed, not through words, but through every room she dared to walk into.